Hello. I hope you guys had a wonderful first week. So let me just recap some of the things that we learned last week. Last week, it was just an introduction to social welfare policy, public policy. So you talked about the policy making process, the stages that a policy goes through before it becomes a law. So we talked about the first stage, which is identification of a problem. And then the second stage, which is the formulation of the policy proposal. The third stage, which is legitimization of the policy. The fourth stage, which is implementation of the policy. And the last stage, which is evaluating of that policy. Each of those stages are very important. For instance, the first stage, where policymakers identify a problem. So when there's an issue that is affecting families and policymakers do not see that as an issue, they will not even move a step further and then try to draft some kind of a policy proposal to address that. So the first stage is very important. We look at certain factors that influences the first stage and all of that. And I believe you guys learned a lot from it. Now, this week, we will be looking at the history of social welfare. Talk about welfare in this country. I believe most of you have heard about welfare. How, what is the history behind all of these welfare programs that we have? Um, because there was a time that we didn't have most of these welfare programs like unemployment benefit, food stamps, what else, housing vouchers, and most of those welfare programs, we didn't have them sometime in the history of this country. They evolved from somewhere. So that is what we will be looking at. And then how various presidential administrations have addressed the issue of poverty and then, social welfare in this country. So the reading for this week will begin from the British Poor Laws. Most of the social welfare programs that we have were influenced by the British. So they used to have, the British Poor Laws where they divided the poor into two. They had what they call the deserving poor and then a non-deserving poor. The deserving poor were those who were classified as, being poor for no choice of, for no they were not to be blamed for them being poor. So those were the deserving poor, like maybe somebody who was an old age, an elderly person, being poor. That is what we call a non-deserved, a deserving poor, or maybe somebody, a mother who is orphaned, or a child who has lost the parents, or maybe somebody who is disabled. So the British classified those people as the deserving poor. And the way that they provided aid and assistance to these deserving poor were different from those that they also call the non-deserving poor. The non-deserving poor were those who they were poor because of their own doing. That is how we put it. So they were classified as being poor because they were lazy or they were drunkards or they were vagrants. So the way they address the welfare programs for the non-deserving poor were different from how they address the welfare issue for the deserving poor. So for the deserving poor, you learn from the readings that they provided them with a lot of assistance. But the non-deserving poor, what they did was that they put them to work so that they will work so that they can make money or maybe make a living for themselves. Now, around this time, there was this US diplomat by the name Benjamin Franklin. He was traveling all over the world and then seeing how some of the other countries were, the social welfare, how it was being organized and how they were helping the poor. So he wrote a book, he wrote a paper which was titled The Welfare State. So when you look at the forum for this week, I put one of his quotations that he wrote, since this is a social welfare class, a policy class, for us to discuss it this week. Now, Benjamin Franklin reflecting on how in America we should also address the issue of poverty, providing welfare assistance for the poor. He wrote this book, his paper on the welfare state. Then he said something that I want to quote exactly how he wrote. He said, I am for doing good to the poor, but I differ in opinions of the means. I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading or driving them out of it. In my youth, I've traveled much and I observed in different countries that the more public provisions were made for the poor, the less they provided for themselves and became poorer. And on the contrary, the less was done for them, the more they did for themselves and became richer. Now, in short, what Benjamin Franklin was saying that I've traveled all over the world, and I see that when it comes to helping the poor or providing assistance to the poor, I realize that if we make it easier for people to live in poverty, they will become poorer and they will not live themselves out of poverty. But when we make it very difficult, strange, like very difficult for them to live in poverty by not providing them with welfare assistance and all those, goodies, they will be compelled to get out of a poverty and do something for themselves, to take themselves out of poverty. So in summary, what Benjamin Franklin was saying that was that he wasn't in favor of, providing all of these social assistance, welfare programs for the poor, because when we provide them with all of these welfare programs, we make it easier for them to live in poverty, and they will continue to be poor. But when we make it difficult by not providing them with all of this assistance and all of these things, they will be compelled to do something for themselves. And he was saying this based off on what he had seen in other parts of the world, especially Britain, because he had traveled all over. So I've provided a link to his paper on the PowerPoint slide for this week, and there's a discussion forum. I want you guys to also express your view on what you think about Benjamin Franklin's quote of, how we should help the poor or not helping the poor. Now, another thing that, we'll also be looking at this week is how various presidential administrations have handled the issue of poverty and social welfare. So we will begin from the 1930s during the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, as the name implies, the stock market had crashed. Most people had become unemployed. It was also around the time that, the World War was also going on. People were we didn't have any kind of welfare program. And then at that time, then FDR campaigned on what he called the New Deal, that he was going to do something about the problems that families were going through. So FDR won the elections, and then he decided to pass what he called the New Deal. Now, the New Deal was to address three main things. It was to provide some kind of relief, immediate relief for families, because at that time, the stock market had crashed, the economy was down. Most of the banks have even closed down because they've lost a lot of money. People had become unemployed. Unemployment was very high. There was a lot of suffering. That's why it's called the Great Depression. So when FDR passed what he called the New Deal, was to provide immediate relief for families. Now, if you want to think about the New Deal, something that will help you to understand it is in 2020, when we had COVID and the lockdown, and most people had lost their jobs, and Congress passed what they call the CARES Act, where they provided cash checks to families. That is something that FDR was planning to do, provide immediate relief, and then also um, recovery for some of the banks and other things, and then also bring about some form of reforming the welfare state so that families will not go through that particular thing again. So one of the major policies that were passed as part of the New Deal was the Social Security Act of 1935. And Social Security Act is going to be the foundation for most of the things that we'll be talking about in this class. So in this week, you'll be learning about the Social Security Act and then some of the things that the Social Security Act helped to address. One of the Social Security Act is a social insurance program. Now, throughout this class, you'll be learning the differences between a social insurance program and a public assistance program. A social insurance program is a program where it's just like insurance. If you have an auto insurance or home insurance, you have to pay into it before you qualify or you can benefit from it. So if you don't pay into it, you don't benefit from it. So if you have a car and you have an insurance, you have to always pay your premium so that in times of trouble, maybe you have a wreck, you can file for, an insurance claim. and then your insurance company is going to pay for it. The same way with social insurance program, you pay into it. So the Social Security Act is just like that. So if you're working and you take your paycheck, you always see that there is you know, they deduct some money towards it because you are paying into it so that when you retire, you can withdraw your social security benefit and some other things like Medicare, which is health insurance program for the elderly when they retire. And I want to talk about public assistance program. For that one, you don't have to pay into it. You only have to demonstrate that you are poor and then you receive it. An example is, say, food stamp. So for food stamp, you don't have to pay into anything. You just demonstrate that you are poor. Each state has its own way of determining who is poor and who is not poor. Another one is Medicaid. Medicaid is also a public assistance program. Once you are determined to be poor, you qualify for that health insurance program. So we'll be looking at how all of these administrations handle the issue of poverty from FDR when they passed the New Deal through to LBJ, Lady B. Johnson, his Great Society, and then his war on poverty, how they passed the food stamp program and some of the Medicare, Medicaid, and all of that through to President Reagan, how he also addressed the issue of welfare. Um, and then, till date. Now, another assignment that you'll be doing this week, I asked that you list and compare two recent administration and then how they also address the issue of social welfare policy. So basically, that is what this week is going to focus on. If you have any questions, send me an email and I'll be ready to answer your email. Have a wonderful week and I wish you guys the very best.